Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we've been joined by Tabitha Jane, author of The Nature Process. Tabitha, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm happy to be here.
Are you ready to get started?
Yes.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Structure. The more that you can have a structure around your writing, the easier it becomes. I have never been a fan of just start writing and seeing what happens. I have always found through all the books that I've written that if you take have an idea of a plan and know where the start, the middle and the end goes, what you want to put in each chapters, that then when you start writing, you can accelerate how many words you're writing on a daily basis.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think the hardest part about getting published is to decide that 1, you want to write a book, 2, to commit, and then 3, to figure out, well, what's the publishing route that you want to go down.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you really have to figure that out first before you can really get everything started. I mean, you have to have a game plan, right?
Totally. And for me, it was one of those things, Paul, where I'd looked at it and thought, well, I could go down the traditional publishing route, but then you've got to put in proposals, then you've got the royalty fees where they don't take a lot of money, then there's the length of time before the book gets published. And for me, none of that was appealing. It was far more appealing to create creative control over my book and to be able to publish it in a far quicker turnaround time than if I'd gone down the traditional publishing route.
This is why I'm so biased towards the hybrid method, because I know we were talking before the show. I have a hybrid publishing company, and I'm not just saying I pitch my own stuff, but any hybrid company in particular. The nice thing is that as the author, you retain the creative control. So you get the best of both worlds, where you have someone that's going to be able to get out there and help you with your book, help you promote it, market it, get everything done. But I think the most important thing is control, because I don't freely admit I'm a control freak when it comes to my own books. I want to have that creative control, and that's why I've always been biased towards that method, because I really do feel it incorporates the best of both worlds, where it still has that indie perspective, but you get that more the support that you might get from more the traditional type of publishers.
Yeah. No, I can understand that, because I think the first book that I ever published, Paul, I went with a self-publishing author, which shall remain nameless, and I wasn't too impressed with their experience, it turned out, and afterwards they now have a reputation of stay away from not publishing. So the second one, it was like, okay, I've learned my experience, I'll do Create Space and I'll do it independently. But to have that support is definitely a lot more fun than doing it completely alone. And as I publish more books, I've definitely shifted my approach on how I would do it.
Well, and the thing is, it changes after every book too. We've been launching our 14th book this week, and even just from the 14th, from the 13th, and the 12th, there's always these changes. And one of the biggest things is Create Space is no more. Amazon's absorbed them. So, and I will tell you, going through that route, they're a lot more picky. So they're very nitpicky, and they will not approve your book until it goes through all their specifications, and they actually have a human being now that checks this all. Which Create Space, it was less human, so to speak, and now they've really dug in, where you have to be very careful, and you have to have someone that you know that can get it done correctly, because what happens if they do reject it? Where are you going to go from there? How are you going to get it fixed? And I think that's some of the biggest challenges that have come up just in this past year with Amazon absorbing Create Space, especially if you want to get that paperback version. Kindle one's still pretty easy, but the paperback can definitely be a challenge if it's not done right.
That's interesting, and that's good to know, because I've not published a book yet since that merger, so I have no experience of how the process has changed.
Well, and that's the biggest thing, process, because it's always always changing. I think the one biggest consistent we have in anything in life is change, and especially in publishing, you got to really stay on top of that because there's always something changing every day with them.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
This is a really good question. It kind of made me think about it a lot. I mean, when I launched, because I have two editions of the Nature Process, when I launched the first edition, I definitely used the whole Kindle strategy of having it for free for a certain amount of time period so that it would get more downloads, and then that would push up the sales and continue doing that. And that worked quite well for me and gave me a lot of organic reach, but also where the Nature Process had kind of come about for me. I mean, that was one marketing strategy, but I ended up, I mean, the Nature Process has a process behind it. So I was training facilitators. So then I was able to give them discounts and they would buy the book in bulk and then they would sell the book for me as they were running retreats and workshops. And that was a very, very good way of getting a lot of traction with the book when it was initially published.
Could you walk us through how you did that? Because that's such a great strategy.
Do you know, I would love to say it was a strategy, but it just kind of happened. And for me, I mean, if you're writing a non-fiction book, you want to be able to certify people in a process if you've got it. So, I mean, with the Nature Process, I had initially launched an online course first and foremost. So I had launched an online course, raised money for a nonprofit organization, and that had generated, I think, if we're in US dollars, probably about $15,000, $20,000 for this nonprofit organization. So this gave me huge, massive exposure in terms of the process. What I then did was I literally transcribed that course and turned it into a book because I got so much positive response from it. So from there, I then had the book, and because I'd launched the course before the book, people got in touch with me and says, well, I want to be able to use this in my work. The first person that got in touch with this was a meditation and yoga teacher. So I trained her in how to use this process within her retreats, and it kind of started from there. So it wasn't initially, like, I had no expectation that this was going to be a strategy that worked, but coming from that perspective of having the book written from an online course that had already generated a large amount of interest, because I mean the course, like the 2 years that the course ran, I mean there was hundreds of people going through it from probably, I think the total was between about 16, 17 countries around the world. So I mean I got a global interest in this process straight away. So then that made it a lot easier, as I said, to then launch it on Kindle, do it that way, but have the interest from people coming in and saying, well, I want to teach this. And that's almost like when the light bulb went off. Well, if people are teaching this, it makes far more sense for me to offer them a discount for bulk buying, and then they can go and sell it individually. And for me, I think, okay, this is an entire process, but if you were looking at it from a strategic perspective, and if I was going to use this as a methodology or a strategy again in the future, even if I didn't have certified facilitators, I would still look at people who were service professionals in the same industry that I was working in and approach them directly and say, look, here's a win-win solution. I can give you a discount on this book. If you're doing workshops, speaking, seminars, then that gives you something to sell and you can create additional revenue from it as well.
And I love how essentially you reverse engineered everything and then almost flipped it to the other side of it. So you went from online course to book, and then essentially going back even more to book to online course to bulk selling. I mean, that just ties in perfectly.
Yeah. I was pretty impressed with the fact that the strategy came together when I had no idea what I was doing at the time, and it was all organic. So that has given me a good future focus for how I would continue to adopt and integrate, and even how I continue writing books now. I mean, I'm in the middle of doing another book. I'm incorporating it in a training manual for a coach training program that I've got. The whole reason of doing this, and even the Nature Process, is incorporated into the coach training program now. So it's like, these are the core texts. So basically anybody going through the course, they need to read them. But because of my academic background and my science background in terms of the coaching and the nature connection stuff that I do, there's also the books that they can use with their clients as well further down the line. So I'm preparing almost like the manuals that they can use to work with their clients to save them from having to become the expert. And then even with these books, as I continue to go and approach bigger organizations, it's still using that whole process of, well, great, we're going to go and do retreats and workshops. Further down the line with the coach training module, I'll also license this. So I've got people doing the stuff that I'm doing as well. And as part of the course training, then you bulk buy the books. So okay, it's a lower cost, but then you're able to say that far greater numbers of people have read your books because you've incorporated it into other aspects of your business and used it as a way to enhance your offering, rather than just having a standalone book that you then need to figure out how to generate revenue from afterwards.
Plus, you can use that as the base of your ascension model, where you've got the book out, it's in there in bulk, and it could create different opportunities to upsell them into the program too, even for those that are part of it for downline projects.
Exactly. And I mean, I host my own podcast as well. For a while, I was giving out the book as a tool. Here you go, you've been on my podcast, here's the book as well. I stopped doing that as a strategy, but there's just so many ways that you can use it fundamentally further down the line. And even now, my podcast, there's stuff that's getting integrated into the book. So I'm making sure that it all comes together in a way that, like you say, it allows it to get out and either be a gift or be a way to get more people into the programs that I'm developing, or to be a core fundamental tool for the people who I train to use to go deeper into my work.
Well, and it's just like any other launch. When you have a book launch, I always tell my clients you have to treat it like a product launch and always tie in a product to it. And you're a clear example of doing that and doing it successfully.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because that was one of the things that when I looked at publishing a book, I mean, I thought about that, and I did do some research going back, I think, into how to make this, because what I realized is I think some of the initial research that I'd pulled out, Paul, had said that you don't make money off the book, you make money off the back end. And it was like,
Yes.
okay, well, if that's the case, how do I make sure that I'm making money off the back end?
Yeah, I mean, you can make decent money in the front end with the royalties, but you make the life-changing money in the back end. That's the game changer.
Yeah, totally. And it's how it's worked. It's been nice to have money coming in from the book, but it's not my main source of revenue.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, let's go to the hard question, and that is, of course, your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah, this was a really difficult question for me, Paul, because I was the child in the village that the librarian phoned up when I was about 7 to my mum and says, you need to have a word with your daughter because she's coming into the library every day and exchanging 4 books, and there's no way that she can possibly read them. And my mum said, no, she is. And after I, they took the books back, the librarian asked me some questions about a book and realised my mum was telling the truth. I ended up getting, I was the only child in the village with an adult library ticket, which meant I could take 11 books out and saved me going to the library every day. So I have read so many books, there's not a number one. Where I've gone back to this is I looked at it and thought, well, what is my favourite genre? And my favourite genre is romance. And that made me go, okay, so then what is the number one thing that I have learned from my love of romance and switching on to Mills and Boons or Harlequin novels when I was 8 years old? And I think the thing that I have learned from them is it always works out in the end. Now, irrespective of whether or not you get a happy ending, because that's not the point. What I mean is, if you haven't got to the good point on your journey of your story of life, it means that you're not at the end of your book and you're not ready to start a new one, because not only have those books taught me that, but life has also shown me it's true. If you're in a high or a low or a dramatic moment in your life, you're only at a key moment of the plot that's not reached the happy ending, and you get there.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the genre. Are there any particular books?
Any particular books? I'm trying to think. I mean,
If not, no worries.
yeah, I think the only one that would come to mind is Gone with the Wind, and
Uh-huh.
then the sequel. Because I read Gone with the Wind in 24 hours when I was 10 years old and ignored everybody at my birthday party to sit in the corner and read it. Um, the random child. You're all watching movies. I'm sorry. Gone with the Wind's far more interesting. And I timed it because I was that random child and timed how much time it took me to read it. So I read Gone with the Wind in 24 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, and then read the follow-up. Like, it took 20 years and somebody else published it. And I think I read it in about 3 nights. A friend of my mum's had said, here you go, Tabitha can borrow the book. And 3 days later, my mum brought it back and she was like, no, Tabitha could read it. And I was like, yeah, she's already read it. But they have stood, I think, that's and again, that's that love story, the love story between Rhett and Scarlett from the first book, to then have a follow-up 20 years later where they got their happy ending. And it was horrendous how they eventually ended up with their happy ending and whatnot. But oh, that made me so happy.
Well, for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is a quote by Lao Tzu, which says, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished.
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first steps.
Exactly.
Love Lao Tzu is one of my favorite philosophers, so excellent. Well, Tabitha, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way for people to find me online is through my website at www.earthself.org.
Well, Tabitha, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been so much fun.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.